Hi, I'm Ananth with NetSurian, and this video is to discuss the Log4j2 vulnerability called Log4Shell that was initially disclosed on December 9th. This is the second version of this video done to accommodate the second vulnerability that was disclosed on December 14th. So what are we going to talk about? What exactly is Log4j? What is this vulnerability all about? First and foremost, are the services and products offered by NetSurian, are they vulnerable to this new problem? And then second, the managed threat protection service offered by NetSurian, can it help me with my attack surface? Because I have no doubt lots of assets on my network that might be vulnerable, and so can that help? Lastly, what are some lessons that are learned from this security incident? So first of all, what is Log4j? It's an open source Java-based logging framework that has been around a long time and is very widely used within many Java applications. The library is used by developers to log various data within their application for debugging, for performance, to understand what's going on. And it has become ubiquitous, you could say, in industry over time. So what exactly happened here? Well, on December 9th, a vulnerability was disclosed that allows remote code execution. The person that did this works for Alibaba Cloud Security, and they did so responsibly. They informed the Apache Foundation, the vendor here, before they actually disclosed anything. In a nutshell, this is a vulnerability that is easily exploitable. And because it's also so widespread, this library is so widespread in its use, the vulnerability was deemed a 10 out of 10, the worst of all possible things, according to the common vulnerability scoring system. A couple of days later, a second vulnerability, this time 45046, was disclosed and a new fix was provided, whereas 2.15 addressed the first one, 2.16 fixes the second one, and this has a lower vulnerability score compared to the previous one, but you probably need to address them both. So has the world come to an end? So I'd say not so fast, take a breath. It is true that this is a very widely used product, and in fact, it's even in the Mars rover. So this problem scope is in fact interplanetary, it's not just planet Earth. But before the vulnerability can be exploited, there are a few things that have to be true, and they may or may not be in your situation. So you want to take a breath before you run for the hills. What is the it depends depend on? Well, what is the version of Java being used, and what is the actual configuration you have of it? You could upgrade your Java virtual machine and get safe. You could reconfigure Java and get safe. How exactly is your network configured? Primarily, do you use a web application firewall? If you do, that might be enough to blunt the attack. You'd still be vulnerable, of course, but then not exploitable. And that's a W. You should take the win any day. Also, all of that might be true, but is the vulnerable machine exposed to the internet? If the answer is no, then it may be harder for the outside folks to attack you. And then, of course, what are the Log4j configurations? You could configure it in a way that this vulnerability is not exploited. Now, let's be clear about this. This is a widespread problem, and there is a tremendous amount of scanning going on around the world. Everybody, all the bad guys are busy scanning you to find out whether you happen to have a vulnerable public-facing machine, and if so, can they exploit it? There is ransomware attackers, your Cobalt strikes and so on, that will leverage this. So you don't want to take this lightly, but at the same time, you do want to take it thoughtfully. So how hard is this to exploit? Well, that's the sad part. It's really relatively easy, especially for an attacker. And this is as a result of how log messages are handled by the Log4j processor. All the attacker really has to do is have a website with LDAP and then send a message that contains this specially crafted message. A in this message that you see here is the malicious code. And depending upon how you're configured and all the other things that I discussed in the previous slide, that malicious code may actually execute. And that's a big problem. Remote code execution is a really bad thing. So here's how the attack works. And notice how many chances you have to blunt it. On the left is the attacker, and he is looking at a vulnerable server, victim.exe, which happens to be public facing and vulnerable. And because there is no WAF, he gets right to it. Once he gets right to it and the vulnerability is available, why then Log4j, if it's enabled, and you could disable it, of course, will return the results to the malicious LDAP server evil.exe. But you could prevent that too with the configuration of Log4j if you didn't want to disable it. And then if that was all true, why then it would return the results. But you could again do some disabling of remote code bases to blunt the effort. So there's a bunch of different ways in which you can protect yourself without the sky falling. But of course, they require you to think carefully. Where is Log4j? And then how can I actually patch this, if not necessarily through the updated version of library, then through this configuration. So what did Apache do? After all, this was responsible disclosure. Well, they first put out 2.15 and now 2.16, and this fixes both of the vulnerabilities. What must the vendors do? Those that use Log4j, of course, will incorporate 2.16 in their latest versions and provide that to you. But it's a long slog. This thing is so popular, so widespread, and it's so painful to update all of the applications that this will take its own sweet time. Some are predicting even months, if not years. The US federal government has said you have till Christmas Day to mitigate this. Good luck with that. So another thing you could do to mitigate is to apply this configuration, the -d no lookups. This will not fix your vulnerability, but it will prevent you from being exploited, and that's a win. You should take that. Apache has also said that you can remove the JNDI lookup class completely from the class path. And if you did that, why then this vulnerability could not be exploited, period. And so that's another choice you have with your Java configuration. So Netsurian offers a bunch of products. Are they themselves vulnerable? Good news, the short answer is no. We said this, some days ago on the heels of the discovery, but here are the details. The event tracker core code does not use Log4j. We do use Elasticsearch, but the Log4j version in there is not vulnerable to remote code execution because it uses the Apache Security Manager. We, by the way, know this because the Elasticsearch people said so, but we also tested it with Log4Shell and confirmed that this is in fact true. So the Netsurian event tracker product is not vulnerable to this particular problem. Our threat center is based on MISP and it does not use Log4j, so no attack surface there. And our event tracker endpoint security solution does not use Log4j either. We also offer a range of products in the connectivity space called Branch SDO, and we don't use this Log4j library there either, so nothing to worry about. If your instance of event tracker is hosted by us, in addition to the fact that the instance is not vulnerable, we happen to also implement a web application firewall and many other defenses. And we know for a fact, because we tested all of this, that this configuration is not vulnerable here, and all of these attempts are rejected by our WAF. So the good news, Netsurian products and services are not vulnerable. All well and good. What about all the other assets I have on my network, you might say? I subscribe to the Managed Threat Protection Service. And what can it do to help me with this 10 out of 10 vulnerability? Our service covers a range from pre-breach to post-breach, with talking about prediction, talking about prevention, also, of course, detection. And so our service provides you assistance with your assets that might be vulnerable in a variety of ways. And let me recount those. First of all, prediction. If you subscribe to our vulnerability management service, we have checks in there to specifically detect vulnerable Log4j implementations. This library is available on both Linux as well as on Windows. And then we have both credentialed and uncredentialed checks ready to test this. Our team has reached out to you to see if you want to schedule an out-of-band scan looking for this and only this. If you choose not to worry, nothing to be fearful of. These checks are going to occur at your next regularly scheduled scan anyway. But if you want to get a jump on it, you could respond to us or reach out, and we'd be happy to do this. This would tell you whether you have vulnerable Log4j implementations around your network, and then you could examine whether they are exposed to the internet and the likelihood of getting exploited is high, yay, nay, and inform your response. From a prevention strategy, if you are hosted by us, our web application firewall would block such an exploit, and anything you have hosted by us would not be vulnerable. If you're implementing Event Tracker endpoint security, then any malicious payload that is delivered by this vulnerability will be blocked. It doesn't block the attack itself, but the results of the attack, which is of course them trying to send out malicious codes, it will kill that stuff dead. And so that's a prevention defense. If you have systems outside the scope of Event Tracker, but they are vulnerable to Log4j, according to the guidelines, you could choose to add this configuration, -D, no lookups, and this will prevent the vulnerability from getting exploited. You could, of course, get releases of applications that incorporate Log4j that have now the updated 2.16, and you could update those applications, but that, as I said before, is going to be a long slog. You could also remove completely the JNDI class path. So that was prevention, and that was prediction. What about detection? Well, if you subscribe to our intrusion detection service, then we've updated the checks, and should any attempts be made around this vulnerability, why then this will result in a priority 1 alert, and you will get your information from us as to who's attacking and what's the endpoint that they are targeting with the attacks. We also updated our threat intelligence platform. It's called the Event Tracker Threat Center, with all of the associated indicators of compromise. There are a variety of sources providing this info now, including DISA, CERT, and of course, Microsoft. And we have comprehensively updated and continue to update all of these. This includes IP addresses that are known to be leveraging this. This includes MD5 hashes of malware that's out there. And all of these will trigger alerts, which we will notify you of as priority 1. The platform's already also been updated with alerts, saved searches, and dashboards. The searches are being conducted going back to December 9th to see if there had been any attempts. And if so, you will be notified. If you are a self-serve customer, these updates are available to you to implement on your instance. A separate video demonstrating all of this is available on the same website. So here, detection is comprehensive with NetSurian's managed threat protection, and this is a summary page. What are the lessons learned? Well, one is attacks are occurring all the time. Every piece of software that's out there is vulnerable to something. I mean, here's something from the Apache Foundation. These guys are no slouches when it comes to software. It's open source, so it's been inspected over the years by a number of people. And yet many years later, after this library has wormed its way into all sorts of applications, we're finding this vulnerability. So what that tells you is that no matter who it is, systems are vulnerable, and so monitoring is necessary. You can't assume that your prevention defenses are going to work all the time. There is a trope that says we're too small to be attacked. It really doesn't matter. No such thing. Really, you cannot assume that your old defenses based on your firewall, based on your antivirus, are sufficient. So if you're not using managed threat protection services to monitor yourself 24/7, then these kinds of attacks will get through and can cause significant damage. It's not really all about the endpoint. It's not just prevention. You cannot stick an EDR or an antivirus and declare victory. You have to think of adaptive security. Of course, in this instance, all of the behemoths that are out there in the industry, your multi-billion-dollar companies, that provide EDR, were not able to do much about this. This is really not in their wheelhouse. It says again that just prevention is not really sufficient. Defense in depth is necessary. Did you notice that if you were hosted by us, we do WAF, web application firewalls, as a basic thing. We monitor our own stuff 24/7. We've got Event Tracker endpoint security that can kill this thing implemented everywhere. This is all very important and necessary. If you're hosting stuff yourself, then you should be thinking about these too. You could, of course, leave the driving to us if you're hosting Event Tracker and not have to worry about all of this stuff. So that's a short description of Log4j and how it worked out. Thank you for your attention. I hope you found this useful.